Yeah, I know you've been playing for a long time, but just for reference sake, let's go in and tune up. Here's the harmonics over the 12th fret. G, D, A. What's the name of this last one? Oh yeah, E. Hey, how you doing? I'm Beaver Felton, and this is Superchops for bass. Today we're going to become slapping idiots. Hey, we're halfway there now, right? Okay, listen, today's video obviously is on the slap technique. It's going to be geared towards intermediate to advanced players. Now, the exception to this might be some of the exercises I'm going to give you right up front, and anybody can use these from beginner up to virtuoso level. As you'll see, what they are is nothing more than basic ingredients, elements of this style, kind of taken out, pulled away from the patterns, isolated, if you will, and practiced separately, individually. And what they do is help develop and then maintain certain motor skills and motor movements. Then you combine them in all kind of different weird ways, and they end up being the patterns, as you'll see. So a beginner could definitely take advantage of that. Now, I've done a couple of things to try and make today's lesson real interesting for you. One thing is to include some different techniques, such as two-handed tapping. I think there's two patterns with that on it. Two different strains, if you will, of two-handed tapping. Some harmonic chords, and then a couple of different approaches to fretted chords. Once again, just interrelated, kind of integrated, if you will, into the slap patterns. And the point I want to make here is that all the different techniques that are available on bass now, which there's a million of them, with guys like Adrian and Stu Ham, et cetera, it can be interrelated. It's not like you can only slap when you're doing funk, or you can only tap in rock or harmonics when you're playing Jaco jazz or whatever. Anyway, so in addition to that, what I've done is, so that we can get out of the key of E Dorian during parts of the video, which is it's real easy to kind of fall into a rut with this technique of doing that, is I'm moving around to different key locations and different key signatures to get a little bit of variety going on. Now, in addition to those things, I'm going to include practice habits, which I think are crucial to your development. I'm going to show you how to practice in the car, safely, hopefully. And I'm going to try and insert as much theory as I can during the course of the lesson, and using proper terminology so you can communicate with each other in a musically valid way. Theoretically, I'll be touching on rhythm, melody, and harmonic theory. All the above. I'll point out a mode or a rhythmic value as I'm going through. Okay, let me start out by walking real quickly through the equipment I'm using. This is a Carvin LB80 bass, top of the line unit. When it comes to my choice of bass guitars, bottom line is it's got to sound great and it's got to play great. If it looks good, that's a cool bonus too. As you can see, I'm using some of their 5-string basses also, which I really like. This one's fretless, it's fretted. Anyway, so the bottom line is this bass does it all. It's very responsive to all the different techniques that I use. Okay, Kaler wang bars, as you'll see, they're on pretty much all my basses also. I used it in the opening solo. I'll use it during the course of the video, perhaps. I think it's a very expressive tool for bass, and it comes back to tune, oops, all the time. They also make a fixed bridge, which is real good, that I have on some of my other bass guitars, that for those of you guys that are into good tail pieces, without getting into the wang bar thing. Okay, what have we? Strings, GHS, boomers, sub-zero boomers, or super steels. I use light gauge, 40 to 100. If I use a high C, like on a 5-string bass, I'll use like a 25 or a 30. If I use a low B, I'll use like a 125 or a 130. The bottom line with these, they sound great, they last a long time, and they are consistently very fresh right out of the package. Okay, as we head down towards the headstock, you'll see, of course, that I'm using a hip shot. And I use that in the opening solo, and I'll also use it during the course of the video. Let me say parenthetically, these can also be used on 5-string basses, or 6 for that matter. You can see that I've got them on some of my other basses, dropping the B string down to an A, which is pretty thunderous. So that's cool. Everybody knows what these are. It once again drops your E string down to a lower note. I use it going down to a D. You can go as low as a C or anywhere in between. Billy Sheehan, John Eltretti, Will Lee, everybody uses them. Okay, this is a Kleenex unit. I've accidentally torn off the foam, so it's kind of inoperative right now. But I use it for the two-handed tapping. It kind of gets rid of USN, which is, of course, unwanted string noise. And I've seen a lot of guitar players use those, and I've seen a couple of bass players, like Adrian Davison. He's a phenomenal tapper out of Canada. If you're into that technique, you ought to check him out. He's a real virtuoso. Anyway, I think I've seen one of these mounted on his Rickenbacker bass. Okay, replacement pickups. I'm happy with these. However, on some of my other bass guitars, as we slide over in this direction, you'll see the white foundation. These are all Seymour Duncan pickups. And on the white foundation, that's a PJ active setup. It's got white onboard EQ switches. Next to that, the Rickenbacker, oops, is that's a passive pickup known as a quarter-pound pickup. And it's the quarter-pound pickups sound great, even though they're passive, not active. That's a humbucker style. Okay, as we head over here towards my rack, not to be confused with iRack, you'll see I'm using Carvin preamp. It's got full EQ. It's got a built-in compressor, noise gate, and crossover, which are real cool. As we go down in this direction, you'll see I'm using a 900-watt FET. Super loud, super powerful. We'll push gangs of speaker cabinets because it goes down to like 2 ohms. Totally reliable, quiet, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, I'm into ART stuff. The only effect I'm going to be using today is the SGE Mach 2. And let me just point out, from one bass player to another, it's got a billion effects you can use very applicably on bass. A couple of bass players that come to mind that use these: Victor Wooten, who you've already started reading about, he's phenomenal, and Keith Horn, who coincidentally is playing with Victor's brother Reggie in a group 50-50. And both these guys are, that's kind of a lesson to go see them in and of itself, so check them out when you get a chance. So bottom line is the SGE, I used it obviously in the opening solo, and I'll be using different presets out of that to enhance or complement some of the patterns I do during the course of the lesson. Okay, what else? What else do we have? And of course the ART MIDI pedal, which is color coordinated with all the other stuff. Very cool. These are shades. Okay, what else? I don't know if you can see the speakers behind me, obviously Carvin, and it's kind of a 4-way setup. On the bottom end, I'm using a 118 box for ultra low stuff, which is real good if you have a hip shot and or a 5 or 6 string bass. 15 in the middle, 4 10s, and a tweeter on the top. And they're obviously real cool. The stand, this is called an ultra case. It actually holds like 6 basses or guitars. It's pretty expensive, but it's like top of the line. It's very professional. It's totally scud proof. It's you're not going to knock it over. They're on the road with groups like Motley Crue, U2, Van Halen, NXS, et cetera, et cetera. So it's well worth the investment, I think. One last thing I use, the guitar glove. Everybody says, what is that glove? Well, if I can find the lubricant hanging around here somewhere. There's a lubricant that goes on the applicator right here, and whenever you need some, which I've already greased up for the day, you just kind of do this Spider-Man looking routine, and it kind of reduces string drag on your left and right hand. Okay, now let's see. Let's talk about practice real quick. A, you got to practice. B, you need to practice every day. Set up a routine, stick to it. C, practice, especially with this technique, which is very rhythm-oriented with a metronomic device, such as a metronome or a drum machine, which will be here in a little while. Let's see. Now, obviously, that's going to develop your sense of tempo and timing. It's good to document your technical improvement. In other words, you write down the date, the pattern or exercise, how fast you can do it, 1,000,000 beats per minute, whatever, and how long you can do it. So what that gauges is strength, endurance, speed, precision, you know, a lot of different techniques or aspects of technique. And then over a given amount of time, depending on how you practice, then you'll see a progressive improvement. Okay, let's see, what else? The practice thing, as I'm going to demonstrate in a little while, I won't do it on every pattern. It would take up hours and hours of video time. And but I will show you how to practice at like 3 different tempos. So that's real important. Now, a drum machine, which, like I said, will appear in a few minutes here, I'm going to show you is a lot more fun to practice with than a metronome. You can set up different patterns, which are cool to play over. A lot more interesting, a lot more conducive to getting you to pick up your bass and play. Another thing is it gives you variety. You can put it, as opposed to a metronome, you can put a lot of different time signatures, different feels, and I think that's good to become more versatile as a player. To me, that's growth, and growth is improvement. So you want to try a lot of different things. Okay, now I'm going to take you to my car and show you how to practice there. Rolling. All right, here we are in my well-camouflaged Ferrari, and what I want to show you is how to practice bass in the car, 2 ways. One way is take your bass, get in the car, and practice that. However, that's not too advisable. So let's ditch the bass for now, and on a more serious note, let me show you what I actually do in the car. Once again, I kind of maximize my time, so if I'm riding around or whatever, I'm practicing or getting some kind of practice benefits. Okay, for the slap technique, what I do is this. Say if my bass was like this, you can see that this is the basic movement that you're using in thumping for most, most common things. What I do is thump against the steering wheel. Say you can put some music in, tape deck, CD, radio, whatever. I don't know if you'll even be able to hear this. Simple Minds, pretty appropriate. Anyway, you get the quarter note. You can thump real hard. That builds your wrist strength. Do each one of these like a minute, maybe 2 minutes at a time. Then 8th notes, triplets, 16th, broken 16ths, broken triplets, etc., etc. The point is, do one each for like a minute at a time, each exercise. It really builds your strength and stamina as well as speed. Now, also what's going to come in handy is doing a reverse movement. Now, Billy Sheehan would point this out as being kind of a recovery muscle or recovery movement, something like that, motion. And you're actually pulling back against the steering wheel like that, so you're getting the opposite of this. Now that's going to really come in handy when we get to the double thumping part, which I'm going to give you a pattern like that later on in the tape. I mentioned Victor Wooten earlier, and that's one of the many techniques that he uses, and he's really revolutionized it. And the double thumping is where you're actually getting an upstroke note as well as a downstroke. Pretend this is a bass string, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, you will in about 30 minutes. Wow. Anyway, so the double thumping thing that I practice is simply doing that. You're getting a downstroke as well as an upstroke. And you work more on strength than you can speed also, like that. Okay, let me conclude by saying this. I seriously practice this and some other techniques while I'm driving around or whatever. But, and this is a disclaimer for those of you that don't realize it, let me really emphasize the only time you need to be doing this in a car is if you're stopped at a light, waiting in McDonald's drive-thru, waiting on your girlfriend, blah, 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 so that you're not in motion. By all means, the first and most important thing when you're driving, of course, is driver safety. And so if you need to be paying attention to other stuff, forget to practice. That's much lower priority. All right, that concludes the practicing in the car segment. And so TJ, Jerry, whoever, let's take it back to the studio. Okay, now we're back, and whoa, presto, the drum machine's back too. Okay, I'm going to start out by doing some thumping stuff. This seems simple, but what I want you really to do, and I'll demonstrate it in one of these exercises, not all of them, is do it at 3 different tempos: slow, moderate, and then a fast tempo where you're really pushing yourself. We already talked about documenting your technical abilities, so we don't need to cover that again. Okay, what this does, like I said, as simple as it may seem, this is going to help. Obviously, it's going to be good for just right-hand motor movement skills, et cetera, et cetera. But this exercise has a twofold thing. It's good for targeting. In other words, we're going to be thumping across all 4 strings, so you need to get really good at thumping precisely the string you want to, as opposed to, the string next to it. In addition to that, what it's going to do is get your left hand used to muting. Let me go through it one time with a click, just to put things in perspective. Okay, what's going on? Obviously, 4 notes, 4 fingers, 4 strings, 4 frets, forever. It's like a derivative of 4x4 exercise, but I'm thumping twice on each note. Now, once again, the thing is to try and hit. Be sure you're hitting just the appropriate string. And the secondary thing is using your left hand to mute. Check it out, case in point. I'm going to be thumping on the D string chromatically. But you can see on my left hand that I'm making sure to cover the adjacent strings. Like I said, I'm just thumping on the D string, but I'm always laying something across to act as a safety net to make sure if I do slop out, then that string will be muted. Okay, the next thing is more of a right-hand thing. All it is octaves. So you're skipping a string. So it's a combination. Obviously, 1 thump on the low, then you're skipping a string, and on the higher octave, a double thump. Then go to the A and G. Once again, I'm doing these slow, so it seems real simple, but when you get it up to speed, you'll see it's kind of demanding. Invert it. So you're doing double thump. On the lower, and then 1 on the higher. Now this next one gets a little bit more involved, and you're going to find this is it's very commonly used type combination of techniques, if you will. And I'm going to demonstrate now the 3 different tempo principle of practicing. Okay, this is going to be producing thumped hammer-ons, then muted notes, and it'll be phrased in triplets. Okay, once again, thump, hammer on with the left hand, then a muted thump. Then go across all the strings, get real even at doing that. Okay, that was 100 beats per minute. Just for reference sake, let's do, move it up to say 150. Do the same thing. Oh yeah, also I'm abbreviating these. I only went through the pattern like 1 time. You need to do it like 30 minutes or 30 seconds, maybe a full minute. Okay, and then at a faster tempo, let me move it up to say 160, a little bit more challenging. Et cetera, et cetera. Once again, do each one for at least 30 seconds. It really develops that technique. Okay, now let's move on to the other main aspect of this technique, which is the plucking. Once again, these things seem real simple at first. All we're going to be doing is just pluck. I won't even use a metronome. It's that simple, and of course you won't need tablature for some of these things. Let's see, by the way, the tab should have come up on that last exercise. If it didn't, don't worry about it. Okay, this for the single finger pluck. All you're going to do is pluck, but pluck on each string, for example. E, et cetera, et cetera. Once again, work on the speed. But the trick here is a lot of times people get used to plucking on the G only and not good on the other strings, which we're going to get into some of that later where it's more challenging. Okay, now do this, a two-finger pluck. This is going to be one of the ways that we do some chords later. So you're plucking them for all intents and purposes simultaneously. You can see the fingers that I'm delegating to the respective strings. So the left hand doesn't matter. Just fret, say the 7th fret for reference sake. Do that a little bit longer. Move over to the A and D. Okay, now here's a variation of that. And what you want to do, zero in on my right hand, because you're going to see, we're going to do a pluck, a double pluck. You might call it a flam, just like a drum rudiment, where you hear, but that's where that kind of thing comes from in slow-mo. Now, let me go ahead and say this. I pluck with all 4 fingers, depending on what I'm doing. So there may be times when I'm doing it like this, and it doesn't mean I'm mad at you or anything. And it also doesn't mean that I'm fooling you when I say probably the most common way to do it is with the first 2. But I've gotten into a habit of using other fingers. But for reference sake, you're doing the flam, using that. Now, here's what you want to do. You don't want to think consciously about picking up your first finger, then second. You're going to defeat the, your own purpose, really. Roll it like that. As you roll downward, there's, I guess, like a law of physics or anatomy or something that dictates that your first finger is just going to come off first. Et cetera, et cetera. Okay, now let's go into a pattern. And what this pattern is going to do is, it's a real good exercise. Okay, the most commonly used scale and pattern and shape in this technique is like out of a Dorian scale. For example, that's the 2nd church mode. Here it is in E. For the sake of musical knowledge or whatever, theory's sake, root, 2nd, minor 3rd, 4th, 5th, major 6th, minor 7th, octave. Okay, and those things, if you think about it, are very commonly used in hammer-ons and pull-offs, which is what we're going to be doing. We're going to cover 1.5 octaves, and it's a real good exercise also because we're doing single thumps as well as double muted thumps and a series of hammer-ons and then plucked hammer-ons, ascending and then descending plucked pull-offs. Okay, so let me give you this pattern if I can remember where we're at here, and I'll play it for you. Now on this one, what I'm going to do is I'll do it, then I'll slow it down. You'll see some tablature, then I'll slow it down, and you can play along with the tab if you need to. Okay, there's a little bit of slop in the beginning there. But for theory's sake, okay, here's the actual groove. No. Here's the formula. Thump on the low E. Hammer on, 5th to 7th. Then 2 muted. Then here's the positions of all the different things that I did going up and then back down. They're all plucked hammer-ons ascending. The positions, if you want to zero in on left hand down here, or wherever it may be. This will also appear on the tab. Then shift. When we're descending, pull-offs. So in slow-mo, and the tab may be coming up any time now. Okay, now let's move on. Now this next pattern was kind of inspired by a group called Cameo, which is a great funk group. And obviously I'm into credit where it's due, so I kind of took this from one of their songs a few years ago, I guess. Anyway, the variations are mine, but it's a real cool groove. Now, let me go in and insert some rhythmic theory here. Let me start by establishing what an anticipated note is for those of you that don't know. Okay, at this tempo, 2, 3, 4. These are quarter notes. 2, 3, 4. Eighth notes would be counted. 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, so say if we were doing a hammer-on, most hammer-ons, or pull-offs for that matter, the first note is activated on the downbeat. Okay, that's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now, if we were to anticipate that, an anticipated eighth note means on the upbeat, on the and, as opposed to the downbeat as a quarter note, then the first note would be like this: 2 and 3 and 4. And 1 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now, 16th notes are counted. This might be too fast. Let me try it. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a. So if we were going to do a hammer-on using 16ths, okay, what that ends up being is 1E, 2E, 3E, 4E, etc. 1E and a 2E and a. Okay, so if we anticipate by a 16th note on that same hammer-on, you're going to actually be doing the first note on 1E and and then the second one is on the downbeat, which is phrased like this. Okay, now that we've established that, that's the way this pattern coming up starts, so you get the phrasing. Also, I'm going to introduce you to a couple of double stops, which are simply two-note chords in this pattern. And this is kind of the one of the examples of intermingling different patterns, which I discussed earlier on in the tape, or different styles, different techniques within a given pattern. Okay. Okay, what's going on here, if you weren't able to really hear what was going on with the strumming, here's the groove. You look at my left hand, you can see what's going on. So you can start by plucking or hammering, or thumping rather, that hammer on. Then here's where the stroking. That's where that comes in. Here's the positions. I actually started. Now keep this in mind. If you're stroking like this, you need to treat your first finger, if this makes sense, rigid but loose. It's got to be flexible, but you want to make sure you really articulate that down and up stroke. Now what's going on here is the left hand is dictating which notes are muted, fretted, or hammer on. Like that. So here's what's going on. That's the positions. Then for the second half, these are all double stops, two-note chords played at two notes played at the same time on bass. Now this is your option. This is a lot easier because you're still doing just a D and G string. However, I can do it in both places, where even though it looks like I'm fretting all three, I'm actually muting the G string. Otherwise, it would sound like this. Okay, so you'll see the tab come up. What I'm going to do is slow this down a bit, and I'll play it real slowly with you. And the second time, you play it by yourself. Okay, now the next thing, we're going to go to the key of A minor, and we're going to do two different feels. I think you're going to like this. Once again, credit where it's due. This is kind of a derived or inspired by a guy named Wizard, who's a great bass player with a great band, who's kind of legendary in the Southeast here, called Mother's Finest. I think they're based out of L.A. now. But definitely one of the first funk rock groups, bona fide. Okay, what's going on is we're going to start, well, to begin with, we're moving to A minor. And also we're starting this whole pattern with a thumped hammer-on, or pull-off rather, then a mute. I'll spell out every note. First, let me play the pattern. We're going to do it straight, then we're going to do a swing feel. Okay, what's happening there is, first let's dissect it. We're doing a thumped pull-off onto the A, open A, followed by a thumped mute, then a pluck, muted thump, pluck, then back to the original three-note thing. Now, when you loop that, that's what you come up with. Okay, here's the first little variation. Thumped hammer-on, followed by muted thump, then pluck, then these pull-offs. Hammer-on, pull-off, hammer-on. Then the second variation. Okay, what that is what I call the Orlando lick. It's where I first learned it, and everybody in Orlando knows it and has for a million years. And it's a real easy way to get a four-note triplet. Here's the formula. Thump, left hand pat, then followed by another thump. This is a muted thing. Then a pluck, all muted. Or you can do it fretted, which would give you some harmony at least. In that case, I'm using a tenth, which is a major third, an octave high, or a raised ninth, which is like a minor third, an octave higher. Okay, that's your option to use either way, and later we'll do a pattern maybe where we do some harmony type things. However, so, that's where I added that first pluck. So, to add to the Orlando lick, do a pluck, 2 fingers. I obviously, like I said earlier, use different combinations of right hand fingers. Okay, now let's do it in more of a swing feel. And we're going to get into some triplet stuff. Okay, now we're just turning that into a triplet feel. So the first 6 notes remain the same. But now that we're eliminating the last couple of notes from when we were doing the straight feel, you end up with this. First get a handle on that. Then here's the first variation. Once again, this goes back to some of the exercises we did. You can see all I'm doing is either thumped or plucked, hammer on, then followed by a mute. Okay, the second triplet pattern, all I did was octaves. And you can see on the tab, when it comes up, which notes are muted if you can't hear it. Okay, now let me slow that one down. We'll do the same thing. I'll walk through it slow, and then I'll let the pattern continue on for one time through so you can do it by yourself. Okay, now let's go and do something else where we're going to go back to the key of E. This lends itself real well to this thing that I'm going to do, which we're going to be incorporating some two-note harmonic chords. Let me play it for you, then I'll dissect it. Here it is. Okay, all we're doing is, first, okay, the placement, if you can't see, is 5 and 5, then 4 and 7. That's on the D and G. What you're producing is D suspended to D resolved. That's the tonality. Then the same thing in A, 5 and 5, 4 and 7, on the A and D string, and then the groove. You could also do this as kind of an option. Same formula, except you're plucking an octave higher as opposed to the lower thumbs. Okay, let me do the same thing. I'm going to slow it down, go through it one time with you, and then let you have it. You can also use vibrato, obviously, if you have that as an option. Okay, now let's do a strain, if you will, of tapping. And Jeff Berlin did a really great thing. It was back in the late 70s. Even though he doesn't profess to be much of a slapper, he's great at anything he attempts to do, really. This first thing is kind of similar to 5G in that I'm using some tapped notes, but they're really just percussive effect. This is going to be out of key of G, so we're moving around to that. And I think you'll like this. It's got a little bit more room in it, a little bit more space than some of the other patterns. It's not super busy. And where are we? Yeah, just so you'll see exactly where all the notes are coming, I'm just going to play against a hi-hat. As you can see, what's going on there is, so that's pretty obvious, and it'll come up on tab. Now, let me point out, that's 3 notes being produced by hand pull-offs, but it's only 1 pluck. Then an open pluck on the G string. Then that's where the comes in. All you have to do is work on that. And that's where the open part comes in. It's the second variation. So, if you want to isolate one part of the pattern, try it like this. And the slur, obviously, is on the 4th note. That's what you ought to hear. Okay, let's move on to another tapping thing where we're actually doing some fretted triplets. I think you'll like this one too. Okay, what's going on? First, the groove. A lot of time, God, I've been doing that for ages, and it's no great feat by any means. Here's the formula. Then the triple mute, or triple thump. First 2 are muted, the last one's fretted. And just doing a slide. Now, that's functional because You get your hand down in this position ready for the two-handed tapping. Now all that is triplets. You can do one of a couple of ways. Delegating this finger for the D string and this finger for the G. Or, as Billy Sheehan would probably do it, here's the positions. Then move up. Then move up. Then move up. And you can see all I'm doing once again is tap, pull off, then the G string first, then D, G. So we're just inverting the string sequence. So real slow, we'll do that at about 100 beats per minute. Okay, now let's do something else. Let's move to some double thumping. I mentioned that earlier. Victor Wooten is just astonishing at this. And it's where you're basically using your thumb like a pick. We're doing an upstroke as well as a downstroke. So you got to totally approach it differently. You don't want to bounce off the string. You don't want to follow through. Like that. What you actually want to do is position, if you want to check out the right hand, you're going to go on down to where you're ready for the upstroke. If you have a nail, sometimes that helps. And that's the underlying principle behind the double thumping technique. You can do a lot of different stuff with it. So here's an exercise. We don't even need tablature for this, where you're just, at first, now a lot of times this is awkward. This technique is awkward to begin with, but it develops pretty quickly. So what you need to do is isolate it to each individual string. Try and make the up and the downstroke as even sounding and in time as possible. And you can accent certain ones if you want. Now, I'll do the pattern. This is going to be at the key of F. And what I'm going to do is use another preset which really helps this pattern or this style out, I think. It's kind of a filter and flanger preset. As you can see, it operates where it kind of opens the envelope, you know, based on your own. Your own attack. And it really helps complement this technique. So here it is. The pattern is in the key of F once again. Okay, once again, keeping in mind that the whole thing is like 16th notes. Keep that in mind. Now the violation of that, or the exception, will be that on some of the hammer-ons, I'm not really making an attempt to thump or do an up thump, if you will, upstroke. I'm letting the left hand catch the second note. Now, but apart from that, you definitely need to keep the right hand going. Here's the positions. You can start either with a hammer on or just right on the F note. Then here's the next. That's all on the, that's chromatic in case you can't see it, on the E string. You can add a little bit of vibrato there, so up to that point. Start over. Now we're going up. Oops. Super slops for bass. Okay. Now what you want to pay attention to on this part is you got a hammer on followed by 2 muted strokes. And that's it. It's the last position, and back to the F. Or you could hit a low one. Okay, I'll give you the pattern real slow. I'll walk through it with you one time, and I'll let you do it on your own. Okay, now what I'm going to do is incorporate the hip shot unit. So this is going to be kind of out of the key of D, so to speak. I don't know, it's kind of weird. You need to either buy a hip shot unit or detune your E string. If you were to do it in E, you'd have to really change your fingering about, so it really wouldn't be worthwhile to get this exact intervallic relationship. Okay, what's going on here is I'm going to use a flange type setting, and we're going to do a kind of a quick consecutive double pluck. That's where that plucking exercise type thing that we did earlier comes in. And here's the pattern, then I'll dissect it. And as you'll see, I'm using a lot of like rolling notes, a lot of hammer on things. It's not so percussive. Okay, what's going on with this one, besides obviously droning down on the D string, is once again, let me show you a few notes at a time. Here's like the first 5. All hammer-ons. And the next 6, watch. Now here's something you need to take note of. These are hammer-ons, E, A string. Then on this one, even though I'm thumping the D string, the hammer-on is done over onto the A string, the D note. So, then the next, that's where the 2 quick plucks come in. Then the next part, the first 3 notes are identical. Okay, here's where a 4-note thing happens. What I'm doing is a pluck, starting on the 3rd fret, hammer on, pull off, pull off. So up to there. Then 2-note plucks, if you will. You might want to take notice of this too. I'm doing a downstroke type pluck with the thumb on the lower octave. Obviously that's a C and a B. Then the second, last part, F and E. Now I'm doing that flam in between there. Okay, so in slow-mo, let's do it like this. Okay, now I'm going to show you a real good right-hand exercise. It's basically converting a paradiddle, which is a drum rudiment. A lot of you probably already know what this is. It kind of goes like this. That might not sound like much, but the point is it's all even rhythmically. But the syncopation comes from left, right, left, left, right, left, right, right. Now we're just converting that to thump, pluck, thump, thump, invert it. Pluck, thump, pluck, pluck. Now, We don't need tab or anything for this, I don't think, although if it's there, that's cool too. The bottom line is this: practice it slow to begin with. Let me set you up with a click and show you exactly what I do. It's real good for syncopation. Now it's good to go over and do the same thing on the E and D string. Whoops. Okay, what's going on there is the same thing. It just gets you used to plucking in between strings. Now that okay, that's the kind of thing. Now, I'm not going to spell that out. That's just a little flurry of goofiness. But that's the kind of thing you can derive from the paradiddle. Now, I was not doing an exact paradiddle, but I was doing something pretty similar in that I was... And if you want to do some homework or experimentation on your own, I was basically droning off the E, but keeping it kind of muted, and kind of, for the pluck notes, kind of spelling out an E Dorian type tonality. Okay, now, I'm going to do a different thing. This is kind of a different approach. We're going to be doing some chords once again. We're going to move to the key of A major, basically. And this is interesting. There's a lot of songs that I've written for groups I've been in. And since I really don't play a whole lot of guitar or keyboards to speak of, I write chordal progressions and inversions on the bass. Sometimes 2 or 3 note chords, and that ends up being a keyboard or a guitar part. But on this pattern, I'm going to show you we're going to be using a pivot note or a pedal tone. Okay, once again, back to theory. For those of you that don't know what that is, that's where, say you've got one note in this example. One thing's moving, but you're coming back to a constant, which was the pedal tone or pivot note, the open A in that example. Now, what we're going to be doing is thumping basically eighth notes, and I'll do it, of course, with a drum pattern, and then we're going to be spelling out a different chordal melody or movement, if you will, just using 2-note chords plucked on the D and G string. I think you'll like it. It's the kind of thing that would be good in a solo situation, too, I think. Okay. Okay, slowed down, once again, for the most part, just droning eighth notes on the A. I'll give you the exact positions of all these 2-note plucked chords, and also point out that some of them are on the downbeat, some of them are anticipated. The first position, 7 and 7, 4 and 7, 5 and 7. This then do like a G major type shape, 5 and 4, 7 and 6. Now on the second time through, the only thing we do is we add one more chord before that last one. So once again, to repeat. That's the chord that's inserted. Now you can spell out, or you can pretty much figure out what chords we're playing. You can look at this like a D5. You got a D and a fifth below, then a D major, D and a root or major third to a suspended, then G major, A major. Of course, you're leaving out certain intervals, but you're implying those chords. Okay, now I'm going to slow this down. I'll do it once, of course, with you, and then you can play with yourself. Okay, one last thing now. We're going to get to a 16th note thing, which is kind of a pet lick of mine. It's a pet pattern, and it does overlap in that I give this on some of my other audio cassettes, but I think it warrants repeating. And it's a 16th note pattern. You guessed it, because they're all 16th notes. And it's also a great exercise. It's a great groove. It's a great place to take. I've had a number of students or customers that have gone on and actually said, yeah, it's a great place because your drummer can just take off and you can keep the rhythm going. And then add a lot of your own variations, chords, licks, hammer-ons, harmonics, taps, whatever. So it's really wide open. But let me show you the basic essence of this pattern. I'll play it with a click first and point out exactly where every note's coming from. But just as an intro, every note is either done with a thumped note, or a muted note, muted thump, or a left-hand hammer-on, or a left-hand pat. I use the word pat to refer to when you come, say, down from not from a lower fret, but just from the open string. And sometimes a pat can be done with a note, or just a percussive, like that. And this pattern, actually, you can do both ways. I'll point out the way where there's only one real muted note. Here it is. I'll show it to you at like 140 beats per minute. Whoa, I like it. Okay. Let me spell out where every note's coming from. All I did on the second half of that was, and this is a good example too of, or a good way to check and see if your control and your articulation is happening. Mute it with, mute the strings with the forearm of your right hand, and then you can really tell if all the notes are coming out as evenly as possible. But back to the first four notes, check it out. I want you to pay attention to this because a lot of people have a tendency, especially when they first learn this, to want to thump every note, like, which is like a drummer playing every note with each hand or both hands. It's, you're just working yourself to death. So here's the first four notes. Once again, you're starting with a thumped hammer-on. Then watch the coordination between the left hand. The next four notes, or three rather. Next four notes. And the last five of the pattern. Okay, and that's the only muted one I'm doing at this point. So if you glue them together, slow it down, you've got. Voila. Now, let's take this and make something a little bit more musical out of it by adding a couple of variations. Once again, this is a great type of thing to solo off of because you can, keep coming back to that as a constant. Okay, I'm going to show you a couple of different things. The first will be incorporating chords, and then the second will be very fast triplets, which I think you're going to dig. Once again, there's a million ways to do triplets on bass, but I'm going to show you one where you can get some serious triplets, both percussively and or with a melodic type movement to it also. Okay, let me spell out what's going on, obviously. And that's where the first chords come in. Two-note plucked chords, all on the D and G string. Here's the frets, and I'll point it out, obviously. 4 and 7, 5 and 7, 6 and 9, 7 and 9. Then the last two, that's 7 and 6, 5 5 and 4. Now, rhythmically, here's what's going on. You're doing a pluck, then 2 muted thumps. Pluck, 2 muted thumps, pluck, 2 muted thumps. Then the variation, or the exception to that, is the last 2 chords you can do either with one thump in between or open. So in slow-mo. Okay, here's where the warp drive triplets come in. On the next variation, okay, go back to that very first section of the tape where we were doing the exercises, the plucked triplets. Pluck, hammer on muted note. I also want to go in and point out something else. A lot of times I'll use what's referred to as a wrist or a palm mute as opposed to a thumped mute. In other words, it may all look the same, but as an example, I'm trying to get my thumb way out of the way so you can see where a palm mute can be used. If we go to that camera, you might can tell. See, I'm not really coming down with my thumb like that. You can do that, but you can do a palm mute. Okay, so this is your option, whatever works best. So the point here is, if you can do this, then you can do almost anything. Because check it out, here's the locations. They're all 16th note triplets. Here's 8 different positions. Well, let me take it a little bit slower so you can see. First one's on the A string. Over on the D. Back over to the A. Then up on the D. D. G. D. D. So if you do it slow. As you can see, you can. I think on the last one, when I did the pattern a minute ago, I think I did a descending thing, which is more along the lines of something like that. But the point is, you can, after you get that formula down, you can take it anywhere you want. Et cetera, et cetera. Okay, I think that's going to wrap up the technical part of today's lesson. Hopefully I've given you a lot of new ideas and some new approaches. And let me point out something else that I don't think I did in the opening part. If you learn every pattern that I've done so far, you've certainly enlarged your vocabulary. But more importantly, let me place some emphasis or put emphasis on taking some of these ideas or approaches or concepts and then mingle them with your own so that ultimately you come up with your own ideas as opposed to aping or copying me. Kenny Aronson put it a good way one time, beg, borrow, or steal, but try and come up with your own style ultimately. Okay, now this brings us to Beaver's helpful hints. First thing I want to close with or talk about before we close is the audio course. This is granted, this is going to be kind of a plug. The audio course, most of you guys are familiar with. You've seen it advertised and or you have some of it. I'm trying to convert some of that over to video, but I'm trying not to overlap it. But the thing has been, it's gotten great reviews from here to West Germany as far as magazines. It's used from people, you know, all the way from beginners to BIT graduates, Berkeley tutors, Will Lee, Kenny Aronson, name players, Dave LaRue, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the strong point about the audio course, even though it's not video, granted it's not quite as easy to see, but every note is I think, accounted for. It's well articulated as far as the explanation. And the most important thing about the audio course, or the most special thing about it probably, is that it's like 18 or 19 tapes. Consequently, each tape is on a very different technique at a different playing level, so you can really concentrate on just what you want. Now, the other thing I want to talk about, Beaver's helpful hints, is kind of non-musical, but it is, if that makes sense. Just from one player to another, what I want you to watch for is taxes. And I've had a couple of hard times, even though I never really made all that much bread when I was on the road. But 2 things that I made a mistake at. One was keeping receipts or the lack thereof, and another was I had an accountant that was really not very competent and not very versed in what an entertainer and musician can or cannot deduct. So, and by law of averages, some of you guys that are watching this video right now are probably going to get audited. So you're going to save yourself a lot of hassle. If you do save all your receipts, you can always throw them away later, but you can't retrieve them, right? And get a good, competent accountant that knows entertainers' deductions. Okay, having said all that, I think I'll close for this video. I think it's about time for lunch or something. And once again, I hope you've benefited from the video. And I'll see you on the next tape or at the next NAMM show. Stop by the ART booth. I'm going to close with a solo that will incorporate some different techniques that are taught on other audio or video tapes. I'm Beaver Felton, Superchops for bass. See you later.